Hey, I'm Lexi, and this is what you should know. So to start my episode off today, I would like to thank absolutely everybody who has liked my podcast, has been listening to it. The support has been absolutely amazing, and I am so very grateful to be here with all of you. Thank you so much. A fun little thing I've noticed recently, which probably took me a little bit too long to realise thinking about it, and that is What You Should Know Australia. Its acronym is WHISKER, like a cat's whisker. And I spent about 5 minutes giggling at that because I don't know who decided I was an adult, but here we are. So before I say another word, I would also like to start by saying the following. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners are advised that this episode contains information and accounts of deceased persons. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional occupants throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So to give a heads up on this case, it has a lot, and I mean a lot, of contentious issues. This episode will not only cover the murders of 3 young Aboriginals, but it will also shed light on the systemic racism that was, and in some cases still is, in place amongst the police. That being said, I will be reporting on the events of the Bowraville Murders, not debating whether or not something was right or wrong. I say that, but I also know I'm very likely going to voice my opinion on whether or not I think something is stupid, because I am a huge advocate of people being treated with respect and decency, and in the research there was a lot that was quite upsetting. Now, I won't be commenting specifically on cultural differences here. I do not feel qualified to do so. I really do not. So if there are any First Nation listeners that would feel comfortable reaching out to me and letting me know any impact in this case that you feel I should also be reporting on, please by all means reach out and let me know. I am more than happy to listen. In fact, I implore you to do so. The reason I don't feel qualified to comment is I am so white that mayonnaise is spicy, so take what you will from that. That being said, some of the information in this case will be distressing, and if you feel that is too much for you, feel free to listen to last week's episode. That was a bit of a shallow dive into some fun conspiracy theories revolving around the disappearance of Harold Holt. But let's deep dive in what you should know about the Bowraville Murders. This is one of Australia's worst unsolved cases that has been heavily laden with systemic racism. Unsolved is used in the legal sense, as no convictions have been made. And that being said, there is enough evidence, in my personal opinion, and in the opinion of other podcasters and people from Bowraville, to say that the person responsible is known. The serial killings of 3 Aboriginal children during the 5-month period during 1990 to 1991 were all the same street in a rural town in New South Wales. And of what remains could be found, because one poor soul has never been found, were located off the same dirt track. I don't think you need to be a world-class detective to look at that and go, if they were all taken from the same street, and they were all found and off the same dirt track, there is a high chance the same person did it. There has only really been one suspect, a white man who was acquitted of the 2 murders after what was an obviously racially biased police investigation. It has been over 30 years. The victims' families have fought tooth and nail for justice that is now being passed on to the next generation. And that is just unfair. The first victim of this case is Colleen Walker-Craig. Colleen was the first poor soul to fall victim to this monster. At the tender age of 16, she was known to be responsible but to have an amazing sense of humour, often playing pranks. She would help take care of her younger siblings, being sure to pay some extra attention to her younger brother who was in a wheelchair and had special needs. With her caring disposition, it was no surprise to anyone that she one day wanted to be a preschool teacher. Colleen had been quite excited to go on a holiday with her friends, and had packed her bags. On the 13th of September, 1990, they travelled to Bowraville, where they would attend a party, and then moved to catch the 3 a.m. train to Sydney. Once her bags were packed, she attended the party. There was a campfire set out in the park where guests of this party mingled, but this also sprawled across the road to the house of the host, Marjorie Jarrett. Colleen had been spotted multiple times throughout this party, either sitting indoors and chatting with friends. Other times she was seen under a large gum tree in the park talking with friends and drinking beer. Those who recalled seeing her stated that she seemed a little bit tipsy, which is kind of a given. Even with underage drinking, 16 is not legally old enough to drink in Australia. I don't see overly a huge issue for a little bit of a drink at a party, and being tipsy is definitely not the worst thing that can happen. At midnight, Colleen was seen walking down the laneway next to Marjorie's house. Nearing 3 a.m, Colleen's friends were getting ready to go to the train station. Marjorie had offered to drive the group to the station and searched around the party in an unsuccessful attempt to locate Colleen. They left it to the last possible moment, but decided to leave for the station without her. With no judgment on her friends, honestly, it would not have changed how things went for Colleen. By the time they left, I do not honestly believe that Colleen would still have been alive. But please, if you are out with your friends, don't leave them behind. There is honestly a lot to be said in safety in numbers. Colleen's mother, Muriel, had heard that she had not made it onto the train and became understandably concerned, because this was out of character. Colleen was a responsible young lady. Muriel travelled to Bowraville to report Colleen missing to the relevant police, showing them a picture of Colleen. And this is where the disgusting behaviour starts with the police. One of the officers said to her, "She don't look Aboriginal to us," and then asked if Colleen was really her daughter. For starters, that is poor English. Second of all, I can't even get my head around how rude that is. I understand that 1990 was a very different time. Heck, that was the year I was born, so I can only vouch for how things were as time moved on from there. There are improvements, but the racism does need to stop. The officers then suggested that Colleen may have gone walkabout. To give you an idea of what that means, from what I could find, walkabouts is a rite of Australian Aboriginal society, during which, from what I read, it says males undergo a journey during adolescence, typically ages of 10 to 16, and they live in the wilderness for a period as long as 6 months to make spiritual and traditional transition into manhood. So if you are unsure what that necessarily means, it would be kind of similar to the idea of how a bar mitzvah makes a Jewish boy into a man, or a quinceañera is a celebration of womanhood. But again, what I read, it was a coming-of-age event for males. Colleen, as far as I could find on everything, was born and identified as a female. Now, unfortunately, the term walkabout has been bastardized, now being used in a derogatory setting by non-Indigenous people, usually referring to an Aboriginal person who just left without telling anyone. Which is disgusting. Like, people, please strive to be better. Understandably, Muriel was furious with how the police had treated her and told them in no uncertain terms that she was not silly enough to report someone missing if they weren't actually missing. But the police did not take a report and told her that Colleen would likely show up soon. Muriel gave them a photo of Colleen and left. I can only begin to imagine how livid Muriel felt at this time. But she was not one to fold, and she took on the responsibility to locate her missing daughter. She moved her family down to Bowraville to keep everyone together while searching. Local relatives assisted in the search, and Muriel took the time to find those who were present at the party that night and asked what they may have seen or heard. The police in this instance did nothing. Muriel was alone in her police work, and she was not the one who was supposed to be doing the police work. It was the police that was supposed to be doing that. But again, I'm angry at them because this is absolute bullshit. For starters, you cannot discern if someone is from Aboriginal descent based on their skin colour. They could be as white as an English kid after winter and still be Aboriginal. They could be noir levels of black and still be Aboriginal. The bottom line is you can't, skin tone has no part in this, and it really should not ever. And I am honestly disgusted at how the police treated that. And honestly, my heart just breaks for them because it's unfair. But I will get off my soapbox here because we still have more to cover. At the end of the day, Colleen was a 16-year-old child. She wasn't an adult, and she has never been seen again. And the whereabouts of her body is still unknown. 3 weeks later, on the same street, there was another party being hosted. This was being hosted at Patricia Statham's house, which, incidentally, was only 3 houses down from Marjorie's house. Patricia's daughter, Rebecca, who lived with her too, took her children to her father's house so he could mind them while she attended the party. Rebecca and Billy Greenup had 3 children during their relationship, a 4-year-old girl named Evelyn, and 2 younger boys named Aidan and Aaron. However, upon arrival, Rebecca was understandably upset to find that Billy was too drunk to take care of the children. So she took them back to her mother's house. Rebecca took on the responsibility of minding her own children while still being able to socialise. So she didn't really drink a lot, enough to seem social but not enough to be drunk. After socialising with guests for a time, Rebecca decided it was time to go to bed. The sleeping arrangements in that household meant that Rebecca shared a room with her 3 children. With Evelyn beside her, Rebecca fell asleep, fully dressed, and didn't wake at all during the night. When she woke up, she felt a little bit sick, and like something was very wrong. Now, waking up feeling sick after having any amount of drinks, that's kind of normal, but as it was described, this was not the kind of sick you feel when you've had maybe 2 or 3 beers. This was something much worse. As she looked around the room, she saw her 2 sons quietly playing together, but she could not find her daughter. It had been said that Aaron and Evelyn had a close sibling relationship where you could often only find one with the other. So not being able to see her initially in the room was weird. Rebecca asked the boys if they had seen Evelyn, but they just stared back at her, silently and blankly. The next thought was maybe Evelyn had wandered off to go see her father down the street. So that is where she checked next. But she wasn't there, or at any of the houses nearby that would be familiar to her. Rebecca started to panic and started looking further away towards the centre of Bowraville. But with everyone she spoke to, no one had seen the child since last night when she went to bed. As it reached mid-morning, Rebecca returned home and was now scouring the surrounding area of the house for any sign of her daughter. And that is when she saw it. In the middle of her front yard was a pink sand shoe that belonged to Evelyn. I can only begin to fathom the heavy feeling of dread as it set in, seeing that singular shoe. As the community became aware of the missing girl, Rebecca's mother, Patricia, came forward with a blood-chilling revelation. She was woken at around 3 a.m. by the sound of Evelyn crying. She got up to check in on her, walking down the hall to the bedroom. The bedroom door was closed and appeared to be jammed, as she couldn't open it. That was when she heard a thud, similar to that of a window being closed heavily, and Evelyn stopped crying. Assuming Rebecca had managed to calm her daughter, Patricia went back to bed. By the evening, Rebecca and her sister Michelle made it to the police station, where there was only one police officer working. Michelle advised the police officer of the situation and handed over a picture of Evelyn. The officer took the picture and then said, "What do you want me to do about it? I'm the only one here, and I'm about to head home." Michelle repeated that she wanted to report Evelyn as missing and reiterated that the little girl was only 4 years old. And what did this creature with a single brain cell say to this at all? He suggested that Evelyn, a 4-year-old little girl, went walkabout. The fact they did not smack the police officer is amazing, because I honestly would have lost my patience immediately. But that being said, that's where a kind of difference lays between myself and these women who went to actually report her missing. I mean, it isn't like they are trying to report a missing dog. This is a little girl, a child. I can only imagine if Evelyn had been white, maybe they would have done something. And that thought alone is infuriating. The police also began to question whether or not the child being reported as missing was Indigenous, because she had a light complexion and blue eyes. Like, this little girl was absolutely beautiful, cute little ringlet hair and everything. But, again, I stated earlier, skin colour does not indicate whether or not someone is Indigenous. I fail to see how that is relevant to the fact that the child was missing. But once again, like they did with Colleen, the police didn't send anyone out to look for the little girl or to question those who would have been there that night. And again, just like Colleen's family, Evelyn's family were left to try to find her on their own. They called everyone they had a number for. They posted flyers everywhere they could with a picture of Evelyn on it and searched throughout the surrounding bushlands, even though they were struggling to gain answers from those around them. Rebecca knew Evelyn wouldn't have just wandered off and described her as a quiet and shy girl who was afraid of strangers. We all know children like that. They hide behind their mother's leg when they're being introduced to a friend that they've never met before. It took 3 days for the police to finally start searching, along with volunteers from the state emergency services. 3 days. But I guess that is at least more than what Colleen got. They searched the bushland around the river. When the investigators finally started to question people about that night, it became very clear that they were targeting those closest to Evelyn. I understand that it is something to consider, as it really can be those closest to you. However, it became ridiculous when the police accused Rebecca and Patricia of selling Evelyn. The reason they fixated on this? Patricia had received money in her account. However, if they took just a minute, even 10 seconds, to just review this a little bit deeper, they would have seen that it was from Patricia's war widow pension. Eventually, journalists caught wind of this story of the missing 4-year-old girl and came to cover the case. When speaking to the Bowraville police sergeant, he declared that there was no connection between Evelyn or Colleen because he has shit for brains. I mean, I guess at the worst he wouldn't have known at this point, but to confidently say that without any proof to back it up, it's a bit premature. During December of 1990, 16-year-old Clinton Speedy Duro moved from Queensland to live with his father, Thomas Duro. Clinton was a sharp dresser who had a love for football and was described as having a happy-go-lucky personality. Like, he was just a beautiful, positive ray of light, and he would have been a great person from what I read. The kind of person that just makes friends by existing. It was understandable that it didn't take long for him to make friends. While settling in, Clinton made friends with a teenage girl named Kelly Jarrett, who had been friends with Colleen, and not long after started dating her. They were inseparable and were rarely seen apart for prolonged periods of time. On the night of January 31st, 1991, Clinton and Kelly attended a party that was being hosted around the corner from the 2 previous parties at a public housing complex. Rather than head back to their separate homes that night, they decided to stay in a yellow Viscount caravan of a friend. Clinton took off his favourite shoes, and the two settled in to watch music videos until around 3 a.m. Kelly slept through the night, waking up at 8:40 a.m., but she couldn't find Clinton. She originally assumed maybe he had woken up early and left to go home. That was until Kelly saw Clinton's shoes on the floor of the caravan. Clinton had always taken great pride in his appearance and his outfits, and never walked anywhere barefoot. So for him to leave his shoes behind was concerning. Clinton had received the sneakers as a Christmas gift from his father, and loved them so much that he was never seen without them. It was to literally the point where his friends and family would endearingly make jokes about it. Kelly took Clinton's shoes back to his house, hoping to find him there. Thomas was surprised to find Kelly at his door, holding onto his son's shoes, and was deeply alarmed by this. Thomas called the police to report his son missing, but was told that there was nothing they could do, because someone had to be missing for 24 hours to report them as missing. Just to put it out there, that is simply not true. If a loved one has gone missing, report it, and keep reporting it until something is done. Do not accept a lackluster response like that, because every second counts. And it is their job to actually deal with a missing persons report. Hell, go full Karen if they won't listen to you. Thomas set out to search for his son by himself. Without a car, he proceeded on foot. He started at the set of flats where the party had been held, looked through the caravan where his son had stayed that night, checked the pubs and other social places with no luck. No one had seen Clinton at all. Thomas eventually returned home, waiting and hoping that Clinton would return. But he didn't. At the 24-hour mark, Thomas called the police again to report Clinton as missing. But they were, once again, as useful as a candle under water, and did not attend for another full day to take a statement. As Clinton was young and strong, they assumed that Clinton had also gone walkabout. It is almost as if they can't comprehend that there could be another reason for someone being gone. Thomas tried to explain the significance of Clinton having left his sneakers behind, but almost as if they had been lobotomized, they struggled to understand the concept. All they said at the end was they would keep an eye out. Clinton's aunt started pushing for help by calling the local police and the police of the nearby larger town of Coffs Harbour. Unfortunately, most of her calls and messages went unanswered, but eventually a liaison officer from Coffs Harbour came to help the family search throughout the streets and surrounding areas for the missing teen, but nothing was found. Fear spread through the Aboriginal community as people started to fear for their safety and the safety of the younger generation. The police were adamant that the 3 disappearances weren't connected, but the friends and family of the missing were sure it was. The common thread that had been noticed by the community during this 5-month span, all disappearances coincided with a party. The community was sure that Colleen, Evelyn, and Clinton hadn't just vanished, but were attacked. And with this, the concern for their safety peaked, and with that behaviour of the community had changed. Mothers would sleep in the same room as their children to keep an eye on them. Residents started locking their houses up and accompanying their children if they wanted to go into town. 1 week after Clinton's disappearance, a large group of Aboriginal and white townsfolk marched on the Bowraville police station in protest of their inactivity. It is always great to see people pull together to do what is needed, but the fact that it was required for the police to do their basic job is absolutely insane. The search should have started once Colleen was reported missing. If that had been taken seriously, maybe, just maybe, Evelyn and Clinton would have still had a chance to grow up and live beautiful lives that they were supposed to live. But we will never know, because the police of Bowraville failed. What had been happening from the police was no more inspiring than what had been assumed. The assumption was the police had done nothing. The reality was they had contacted the Child Mistreatment Unit of Coffs Harbour. The police had changed their mind from assuming the children had gone walkabout and now believed the families of these children, if not the greater Aboriginal community, had something to do with the disappearance. On February 18th, 2 men were hiking in the bushland just outside of Bowraville, looking for firewood. As they searched, they found the badly decomposed remains of Clinton Speedy Duro. He was still in the clothing he wore the night he went missing, and his feet were bare. A blanket found nearby was assumed to be wrapped around Clinton before the wildlife started scavenging his body. An autopsy revealed that he had died from a severe blow to the head. His jaw was broken, and he had been stabbed multiple times. It was now that authorities had to accept that Clinton had in fact met with foul play and could no longer be ignored. On April 17, a man was fishing in the Nanbucca River, which is just off of the same road that Clinton was found on, when his line caught a snag. He reeled it in only to find a pair of jeans with a belt. These items were later identified as belonging to Colleen. She was wearing them at the party on the last night that she was seen alive. Police divers then searched the river, and by April 20th they had found a further 4 plastic bags all weighed down and containing Colleen's clothing. However, her body was not found. On April 27th, the police received a phone call regarding a terrible smell off the road where Clinton had been found. The callers were concerned due to the recent discoveries in the area. When the police searched the area, they found the skeletal remains of little Evelyn Greenup. A pink sand shoe that matched the one in her mother's front yard was found near her. Marks on Evelyn's skull pointed to the fact that she too was killed by a heavy blow to the head. These discoveries shook the small town to its core, and the Aboriginal community strongly believed that these children had fallen prey to a depraved serial killer. This was not a far cry to believe, as there are far too many parallels to ignore. All victims were taken from a large party. All victims were found in the same area, and both Clinton and Evelyn were both killed with a fatal blow to the head. A homicide investigation launched, with Detective Sergeant Alan Williams taking the lead. This detective had no homicide experience, just saying. None. But to make up for this, he would have the support of local investigators and other detectives from the Northern Region Crime Squad. Unfortunately, racism came in all different forms with this one. One white resident of Bowraville commented to the journalist for The Age, "I wonder if 3 missing white kids would get this kind of attention if they went missing." And to that I say, yeah, they would. William Tyrrell went missing, and he has a $1 million reward for his return. There are white children who get murdered and actually have their assailants convicted. And to add to that, these parents had to rally and protest to get police attention. Maybe it is time for cases of missing people to be treated equally and with urgency. Everyone deserves to live happy, full lives where they can return home and feel safe. When it comes down to this case, there has been a police update recently for evidence that would bring the murderer to justice of Evelyn Greenup. There is now a $1 million reward. It only took over 30 years for it to happen, but it's there. So if you do have evidence, please reach out to the police. And on that cheerful note, this is where I'm going to end the episode. That's right, my loves. This is a 2-part series, and the next episode will be out next Monday for your enjoyment. That being said, please don't be shy. Swing by and say hello on Instagram. I post relevant pictures to the cases, and you can find me at What You Should Know Australia. If you have case recommendations or you just want to reach out and say hello, you can do so by sending an email to whatyousshouldknowaustralia@gmail.com. If you could do me a small favour, whatever platform you are listening on, please send me some love by liking, sharing, subscribing, whatever tickles your fancy. It would really, really make my day. But until next week, stay safe and stay hydrated. Bye!